I welcome you all to this Monday conference. For those of you who are not familiar with the BHRC is an international rights organization which since its inception in 2008 has been organizing awareness campaigns and discussions such as this, mostly focusing on various challenges facing the people of Balochistan. These challenges ranging from socio-economic and political issues to the prevalent humanitarian crisis in Balochistan. Our today's topic is Talibanization of Afghanistan and its impact on the oppressed nations in the region. We in the BHRC believe that the conflict in Afghanistan is not just about the Afghan people, but concerns all the people in the region. And therefore, the predicament that confronts the Afghan people today is of profound concern to us in the BHRC. We equally sympathize with them and denounce the Taliban, who we believe have nothing to contribute in the development of the region, except to further the destructive strategic interests of its patrons. This conference will serve to bring to light the concerns of the people who usually have been eclipsed by the overall situation in Afghanistan. Now, before I go into the details about the panelists, I would like to briefly touch some of the issues that we in the BHRC believe will occur in Balochistan and elsewhere in Pakistan if Taliban succeed in taking control of Afghanistan. Now, one of the foremost repercussions of such a scenario would be that fundamentalism in the region will be boosted, and the jihadi elements will be nourished and encouraged, as they are actively regrouping in various parts of Pakistan and particularly in Balochistan, and of course with the complicit support of the state. Now, while finalizing the deal with the controversial, I would say, controversial deal with the Taliban, the United States overlooked one of the major factors that is directly or indirectly linked with the Afghan peace. I'm referring to the international terrorist groups like the ISIS, Lashkar-e-Jang-ul-Alami, and the splinters of Taliban in Balochistan, which is also home to the secular Baloch insurgents who seek the right to self-determination for the people of Balochistan. However, unfortunate, but in such a scenario, the Sindhi, Baloch, Seraiki, and Pashtun liberal, secular, and the enlightened section of their society or population will be in tremendous pressure. And another problem that will struck these people is the region is that the drug trafficking, whether local or international, by the army or its proxy drug dealers, will increase exponentially. Because that is important for the army as it needs finances to fund its adventures in Afghanistan. And another issue, similarly, will be that resource exploitation in Sindh, Balochistan, KPK, or South Punjab will increase, as it is predicted that Pakistan may be in financial crisis and it may not get funds as it did in the 80s and in the 90s. And another possibility is that the budget allocated to the smaller nationalities might be diverted towards the military budget and expenses. As many of you are aware that there are already restrictions on freedom of expressions, and political space for smaller nationalities has already been limited. During this conflict with Afghanistan, the political processes in Sindh, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and Balochistan will be affected. And there is a possibility of curbing on political activities in these areas. Also, there are possibilities of banning and arrest of nationalist political parties. Now, amidst these underlying fears, we have invited a panel of distinguished speakers who will help us form a better understanding of the situation so that we are not left in the dark about the future. And we hope this discussion will also encourage further debate about the overlooked oppressed nations in the region who are already condemned to live up with the consequences of the decisions of powerful countries. Once again, we are really grateful to all our speakers who have agreed to join us today. And now I will ask Dr. Nasir Dashti the Executive President of Baloch Human Rights Council, to please join me on the stage and preside the session. Thank you, Dr. Siddiqa. Now, I will invite our first speaker, Dr. Aisha Siddiqa Saiba, to please join me on the stage. Dr. Aisha Siddiqa is a well-reputed academic and writer from Saraiki area of Pakistan. She is a PhD in war studies from King's College London with an expertise in military decision-making, defense economics, civil-military relations, and militancy and extremism in South Asia and the Middle East. She is currently serving as a research associate at the University of London's SOAS South Asia Institute. Madam Ayesha Siddiqa Saiba, the floor is yours.
Oh,
Very quick.
I thought Afrasiab was there to start. Right.
So do you want me to?
Yeah.
Okay. So Afrasiab, you heard Madam Ayesha Siddiqa, and I have no other options. So, ladies and gentlemen, we also have with us Mr. Afrasiab, who is joining us today remotely. As many of you are aware that Afrasiab is a well-known politician, intellectual, and Pashtun rights activist. He's a former Pakistani senator and an analyst of regional affairs. Afrasiab Khattak sir, please.
Thank you, Malik sir, respected Dr. Nasir Darsi sahib, and dear friends of Baloch Human Rights Council. I am really grateful for this invitation, and I really congratulate you on taking this initiative. It is very important to discuss these developments in Afghanistan and in Pakistan and your region, because it's important for all of us to understand. And start with Spinoza, who had said, and I quote, "Do not weep, do not wax indignant, understand." It's important to understand as to what is happening. You see, Talibanization is a strategy of Pakistani generals to implement their strategic depth plan in Afghanistan. Mr. Bhutto, in his last book, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, in his last book, which he wrote in Adiala jail, in the death cell of Adiala jail, before he was executed, says that Pakistan's problem is somewhat similar to that of Prussia, which had built a big army for Napoleonic wars in Europe. But once those wars were over, the Prussians did not know what to do with this army. He says Prussians had three options. The first was to expand their country, to have a bigger country so that it can afford a big army. The second was to reduce the strength of the army so that it is affordable to the country. And the third was to keep the status quo and let the country crumble under the burden of a big army. Mr. Bhutto says that Russians went for the first option, and under Bismarck in 1871 they created Germany and their problem was resolved. Bhutto says 100 years after Bismarck, in 1971, Pakistan lost half of its country, even as population-wise more than half. So he says our problem aggravated. He says, let's examine these Russian options for Pakistan. Expansion. He says this is not doable. This is not practical for Pakistan. It can't really go and capture other countries. So the second option, reduce the strength of the army. Bhutto says, army will execute. It will hang anyone who will insist on this. So he concludes that we are condemned to have this third option. That is the keeping the status quo and letting the country crumble under the burden of a big army. Had Mr. Bhutto been alive, he would have been surprised to see that actually his generals went for the first option, which is expansion. So the strategic depth is basically expansion. So Pakistan prepared for it during the war against the Soviet Union, and these madrasas were created to brainwash Pashtuns. It's not just a military strategy, it's also an ideological strategy. They sort of tempered with our national identity. Afghans, Pashtuns' identity was tempered with. We have been Muslims for the last 1,000 years after Mahmud Abbas. You see, so this has been an identity which has been going on. But you see, they tempered with it, they exaggerated the Muslim part of this identity. Not for the law of Islam, but to weaken the other part, the Afghan part, the Pashtun part. So you see, Taliban is the product of this strategy. They are brainwashed. So it's basically a strategy of deconstruction. It's the ultimate solution for Pashtun problem as far as Pakistani generals are concerned. And let me warn you that they are also doing it in Balochistan. Among Baloch, you can see, you see this Lashkar-e-Jhanvi and other organizations working in around Quetta, Kalat, and many districts of Balochistan. It's the same strategy. They are also at it even in the interior Sindh. So you see, this is a grand strategy. So after this, let me just say that after 9/11, it seems that the United States, of course, United States did not plan to eliminate Taliban phenomena, because for them, Al-Qaeda was a problem and the organization which could threaten mainland America. So they attacked them, they degraded them, but they did not ban Taliban. So Taliban was not declared as a terrorist entity as a whole. Parts of Taliban, groups in Taliban were declared. Haqqani network, for example, or other individuals were declared terrorists. They were put in the blacklist of terrorists, but not the Taliban as an organization. Because Taliban was the product of the same jihadi factories which were installed by US and Arab countries during the war against Soviet Union. So they had nothing against Taliban, but they thought Taliban would be there in Afghan society or Pakistani society. But they just at that time wanted to have Western democracy. They thought it would be a very sort of attraction for Central Asian republics and for Xinjiang in China. This was the strategy. But I believe after 2008, this crisis, international crisis of the capitalist system, they changed their mind. I think they just, and they also went to Iraq and other places, diverted from Afghanistan, and they did not really conclude this war against terrorism, which they had started in this, under this banner. So I think they were looking for ways and means to inject Taliban into Afghanistan. So it's bad news for oppressed nations. First of all, because it is Pakistani, the strategy of Pakistani generals and Pakistani intelligence to deconstruct oppressed nations, their identity, to sort of, they are doing it, of course. Would they succeed? I don't think they would, but they're making an effort. Secondly, of course, this will destabilize the region. We can see new wars. You see, the Taliban invasion, the current Taliban invasion, brutal invasion of Afghanistan from their sanctuaries from Pakistan, it's a proxy war. It's not civil war in Pakistan. It's Pakistan's proxy war to demolish Afghan state and to deconstruct Afghan nation. So it's basically a war of hegemony, which Mr. Bhutto had mentioned in spring 1979. This is, but it will have far more consequences. It might have unintended consequences, because first of all, there will be the Newtonian law of reaction. First of all, Afghans will resist. Afghans have been doing it for centuries. Afghans are survivors. They have faced catastrophes. They have faced invasions. And they will face this one also. They will survive. I'm confident they will survive. Secondly, it's not that Afghanistan, it's a new Afghanistan where people are more conscious of their identity. There are urban centers, there's civil society. So it will be difficult for Taliban to rule. Of course, they can destroy it. It's a demolition squad, basically. In 1996, we have seen when they entered Kabul, they just changed the name of the radio Kabul. They called it Voice of Sharia. Islamabad radio is not Voice of Sharia. Tehran radio is not Voice of Sharia. But Kabul radio is Voice of Sharia. They banned Afghan national flag, Afghan national anthem, Navroz, Jirga. They killed Dr. Najibullah. They demolished Buddha. Everything that represented Afghanhood, Afghaniyat was attacked. It was not a coincidence. So they are going to do all this. But I think more dangerous is the danger of big wars in our region. Because Pakistan is already party in this war. Pakistan will definitely get sucked into this war. But other countries will also. I believe Turkey will be an active player this time round. I don't think they will be spectators. I think General Dost's second home is in Ankara. So I think Turkish nationalism, this new Ottoman nationalism will be an actor and player in this whole country. Iran will be second. Even Russia can't be a spectator for very long. I think it's just a matter of time when Daesh appears. The UN reports have confirmed that Al-Qaeda is there, Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, IMU is there, Eastern Turkestan Islamic movement is there, NTTP and other organizations are there. So the terrorist syndicate is there, and it will attract the regional countries. Even for Chinese, it won't be possible to lie low or to keep a low profile. I think when they will see EDIM in Wuhan corridor, they will not be really waiting. They will not wait for them to enter China. I believe they may preempt them by acting against. So it's a very dangerous scenario, and for Pakistanis who love Turkish dramas, they will be in for a shock. Well, they'll find those Turkish heroes fighting against their proteges, the Taliban. So I won't go on because I believe you will have some time restrictions. It's a subject that we can talk about, but I will stop here. And if there's any question, I'll be there to respond.
I really appreciate your time and for sharing your insight with us, Afrasiab Khattak. As Afrasiab Khattak said, that the creation and projection of Taliban phenomena is to deconstruct the identities of oppressed nations, particularly the Muslims. But, as he said, and I agree that it will have some far-reaching consequences, and its creators, as Afrasiab said, the Pakistan generals, won't be spared of the heat of this fire that they have ignited. Ladies and gentlemen, I will go ahead and invite the other speakers, because initially I was thinking I will call the speakers on stage one by one and take their opinion. May I please request Dr. Hidayat Bhutto sir to please join us on the stage. Dr. Hidayat Bhutto sir is a prominent human rights defender and the Vice President of Voice in the Congress, which is a human rights advocacy body. He has been campaigning for the rights of the oppressed nations in Pakistan, particularly the Baloch, Pashtuns and Sindhi people, for the last 15 years. Our final speaker, Hassan Dost Baloch sir. May I please request Hassan Dost Baloch to please join us on the stage. Hassan Dost Baloch is a politician affiliated with the Baloch National Movement, nationalist political party in Balochistan, and he is currently the deputy organizer of Baloch National Movement in diaspora. And one of our speakers, Burzine Waghmar, he excused to join us today just because of some health problem he faced today, and we wish him a speedy recovery. Ma'am, would you?
Whatever.
Okay. So, I will now request Dr. Aisha Siddika Saiba to please share her opinion on the subject matter. Please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Baloch Human Rights Council, for the invite, and thank you so much, Saab. And I'm so, happy to see, especially after COVID, and when one was actually looking forward to some political activity for a good fruitful political discussion, to see so many people gathered here today. Let me start with my own story. I mean, I remember 1996 was when I got posted to Quetta for a brief while, for a few months. And I remember going to the bazaar and seeing Taliban there. And of course, I dress up the way I dress up. And, it was like once on a street, bumped into these Taliban who looked at me in a very hateful manner and said, when we come into power, we'll make sure that women don't walk around like this. And it had sent a shudder down my spine. I didn't have to live in Balochistan. I didn't have to live in tribal areas. I didn't have to live even in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, what is now Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and then was Northwest Frontier Province. What people had to go through on a daily basis as the state engaged in not just training these people, but also housing them. And we're talking about a period, or a result of a period, in which Pakistan's society changed entirely. Let me fast forward. Early 2000, decade of 2010, I started to work on a book, a different kind of a book, after I finished, my book on the military. My intention was to work on Sufism and to start from my part of the world, which is Bahawalpur. I come, from a Sufi family myself. And I thought, what a good place to start with, start from home. But what I realized very soon was that instead of Sufi shrines, I mean, there were Sufi shrines in South Punjab, but what I found was that on every step, there were extremists. On every step, there were terrorist organizations. And my Bahawalpur, which is hub of Sufi culture, had become headquarters for, of a terrorist organization like Jaish-e-Mohammed. And the question in my mind was, how did it happen? And I then started looking around and saw that neighboring Sindh wasn't any different either. There were terrorist organizations, there were terrorists, there was extremism. The entire cultural milieu had changed. And the question then rises is, what has happened? Now, the way I look at it, this Talibanization, there is a short way of looking at it, and it's a long way of looking at it. Now, what Afrasiab, Khattak Saab said, and rightly so, that the military, there is a concrete policy behind it. And so I would take it back, even further. I mean, I would take it back to the 1940s, when Talibanization wasn't happening, but Islamization had begun, the process had begun to happen. And that process was couched in the discomfort of the power elite with ethnicities, with multiple nationalisms that were in Pakistan. I mean, the fact of the matter is that Pakistan and India, like India, is a state nation. it cannot be run with the formula of a nation state. We are different nations coming together to live in a state. And that is a reality. We shouldn't be made to feel ashamed for that other identity, which is very important to us. I mean, for me, my Saraiki identity is very important. I can, I can deal with other ethnicities. I can live very happily and cordially with, cordially deal with other, nationalities that live in the state of Pakistan. But I should not be forced to give up my very important identity. That I'm not, it's not about birth, being born with an identity. It's what you grow up with. It's the language, it's the identity, it's the language you dream in. It's, it's the cultural background that makes you. And the problem has been that the state has been very uncomfortable with these multiple identities. And it has always wanted that singular identity. So for me, the long shot of it is, of even Talibanization starts even earlier. We move forward, 1980s, there is war in, American war in, for me, which is the most problematic war, is the war of 1980s. When General Zia and his regime willingly decided to, for their own needs. There was never any reality. There was never any truth in the claims that that the former Soviet Union wanted to reach warm waters, wanted to invade Pakistan. There was never that threat. Between Ayesha and CIA, that threat was created. And after having done that, after really changing, and it was during this period that the culture in the social culture in Afghanistan was changed beyond imagination. So those Afghan Mujahideen were the first version, and then came the Taliban. Yesterday I was speaking to a friend, who knew the family of the Lal Masjid mullahs, Maulana Abdul Aziz and his father. And he was telling me how during 1990s, 1996, 98, that period, Maulana Abdul Aziz would regularly go to Afghanistan. And he would speak about it when asked that, why are you going every day, every week? He would say, "Hum qiyam-e aman ke liye ja rahe hain Afghanistan." So there was an effort to capture Afghanistan, and recently, by the way, I mean, their confessions come out themselves. Recently, I was looking at this book by another 2-3 minutes.
No, please carry on.
So
I was just paying attention.
In Mirza Aslam Beg, General Mirza Aslam Beg has recently written, has given this long interview which has been turned into a book. And he talks about the theory of strategic death that, I'm sure many of you must have heard about. Pakistan's reason for wanting control of Afghanistan. And they basically say that, and he actually puts it there. He says, what we wanted was a coalition, a kind of a confederation between Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Now, it's so interesting that Mirza Aslam Beg talks about it. In 1960s, the Shah of Iran also wanted that. I mean, at that point in time, he wanted a confederation between Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. He suggested that. In fact, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, as foreign minister of the Ayub government, did not really encourage that idea. He rejected it. The Ayub government didn't entertain the idea. But fast forward, the military wanted to it seems they wanted to create a confederation, but more, as a coalition between, Islamic forces. I mean, their imagination was very different. Happens much later, very different. And for that, Taliban were important. I'm also reminded of a paper a restricted paper that I happened to read many years ago. It was called Gulf Crisis 1990. Now, this is a paper which was written by, it was a brainchild of General Hamid Gul, General Aslam Beg, and General Agha Masood. And they basically said the premise of the paper was that America is going to attack Iraq and it's going to lose the war, which will then create a vacuum which will be filled by the only Muslim nuclear weapon state, i.e. Pakistan. But then it went forward. It talked about bringing Pakistan and Afghanistan in a way, in a coalition, bringing them together, number one. And secondly, it laid out a strategy of how Taliban will be additional infantry for Pakistan's military. So Pakistan and the military of Pakistan has always imagined Taliban as their strength. They've always invested. And because of this Talibanization, they have then spread this kind of extremist values throughout the country. And each one of us who sits there, our societies are affected. South Punjab became a hub of extremism. Sindh, you have extremists going from there. I mean, I talk to my Sindhi friends and they're like, we've been a hub of Sufi values, and we have Sufi shrines. And I tell them, look, South Punjab used to be the same. We have changed, and so have you. And very recently, I mean, when I say very recently, in the last 10, 15 years, there has actually been an onslaught on Balochistan. Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, from Lashkar-e-Jhangvi to Lashkar-e-Taiba. Balochistan Quetta University, where, a very secular society. My memory of my images of Quetta and Ziyarat and wherever I traveled in 1996, it was a fairly secular society. And then what you see is Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, Lashkar-e-Taiba operating in the universities, operating in the society. So there is that increase of influence. And sadly, it is imagined that now by supporting the Taliban are the only force that the state has invested in. Now, it is imagined that, and I'll tell you something. No general is different from the other. No general is different from the other. I am reminded of General Ziauddin, who was made, army chief for a few hours by Mia Nawaz Sharif. And I happened to interview him, and I remember that him telling me, we were talking about India, Pakistan. He said, I have something to ask you. I said, sure. He said, how can Pakistan fight? We don't have enough weapons. There's shortage of aircraft, etc., etc. So I reminded him. I said, yes, and we have another internal problem. There are Taliban and there is TTP inside our homes in Sabat, and look at what's happening. So he turned around, looked at me, and said, no, that's not a problem. I said, what do you mean that's not a problem? And he said, because all we need to do is allow these people to implement Sharia there and ask them not to come to our cities and our cantonments. We are safe. It's not a problem. And sadly, this has been the thinking, that they will be micromanaged. And sadly, I think what the generals don't even realize and understand is that when you feed your societies, when you let Taliban-like forces, these extremists, into, when you let them onto your society, just like wild animals, you allow them to victimize ordinary people. You cannot stop them. And it's very sad that despite that, the military has experienced killings, their own deaths. But sadly, I'm also reminded of this famous interview to Al Jazeera by former ISI Chief General Asad Durrani, when he was asked about 140, 150 children dying in army public school. His answer was collateral damage. Our societies are collateral damage. And unfortunately, these extremists have tended to spread in areas with lesser development. My argument is that poverty is not a driver of extremism, it's a contributor. The drivers are other. And this will be my last point before I finish. We have to understand what the drivers of extremism are in our society. Of course, one is state as a conduit. And the second is that over years, there has been social developments around us in our societies that are then become favorable for extremism. And sadly, one of the things I think we need to look at is the stagnation in our societies. And by stagnation, I mean, when I went around for my research in South Punjab, in Sindh, I mean, one of the factors that I found was that increasingly the middle class professionals had begun to look at the mullah, these organizations that were offering extremist values. Because the society, the liberal society, had not managed to produce an alternative narrative. There hasn't been sufficient fight from within. We have not, our society, people who can do this task have also failed to produce alternative narratives. And that's where we fail. But I think we cannot miss on one thing, which is that this increasing conflict in Afghanistan is going to rip open the wounds that the state thought it had bandaged, it had closed through its counterterrorism measures. The state has never done any counter-violent extremism. And one of the first things which was needed was to shut these organizations. These organizations have not been shut. And unfortunately, we will again be vulnerable. We are extremely vulnerable, and we'll begin to bleed again. And that collateral damage will start to happen again if the state does not stop. And it doesn't make sure that it doesn't allow any soil, any territory in Pakistan, to be used by extremist forces. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ayesha, Siddika, Saiba. It is always fascinating listening to your views. Ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Ayesha, Siddika, Saiba pointed out, that Bahawalpur and Sindh, who had a history of Sufism and religious tolerance, have now become the hubs of religious fundamentalism. The ruling elite of Pakistan have always disregarded the national existence of different nationalities and found the use of religion, or say political Islam, to be used as a coercive force to keep these people together. Now, moving on, I will request our next speaker, Dr. Hidayat, Bhutto, to please share his opinion on the all. Hidayat, Bhutto, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Kambar Baloch. I'm thankful for Baloch Human Rights Council to give us an opportunity to speak on this very important topic, Talibanization and its impacts on oppressed nations. We are suffering since the inception of the Pakistan. Pakistan's ideology is based on two-nation theory. And that Talibanization is basically, Talibanization means fundamentalism, barbarism, and intolerance in our society. As the days goes on, this ideology is getting strengthened, and through this Talibanization, particularly after General Zia's regime, which has been sponsored directly, has impacts on our society. As Aisha says, that South Punjab, Saraiki belt area, as well as in Sindh, they have created chains of madrasas all over the region, particularly in these strategic areas on the highways and along the Thar region, along the border with the India. So this Pakistani military thinks that Talibanization, and still thinks that they are their assets and they are their strategic strength to increase this fundamentalism. When these Talibans were striking, I remember very well that then Chief Minister of Punjab, Shahbaz Sharif, clearly said that don't strike in Punjab because our ideology and your ideology is the same. That means that you can strike elsewhere, you can strike in Balochistan, you can strike in KPK, you can strike in Sindh, but spare Punjab. This was the open appeal from the then sitting Chief Minister of Punjab. This is their strategic assets, and because this relates with their ideology of Pakistan army, and this Talibanization is basically a brainchild of Ayesha and Pakistani army. Hamid Gul clearly says that we have defeated Soviet Union with the help of America. Now we will defeat America with the help of America. That means there are dual standards and double crossing. On the one hand, they work as arsonists to spread the fire. On the other hand, they claim that we are the firemen. So they are basically joined together. They are allies with the Taliban, and basically their interests are same. Corrupt generals, Taliban's is getting their money through the drug smuggling and bribery and other illegal means, and share goes to Pakistani army generals. Same way, the West gives aid to the Pakistani army, and share trickles down to Taliban, and still the Taliban are their strategic allies. And this, as Afrasiab said, that this is bad news for oppressed nations. And our fabric, our society, our culture, which has a religious harmony, tolerance, and huge values, which are Sufi values, as Aisha says, that our saints, in Talibanization, our saints, the tombs of saints has been attacked and bombed, just like Kalandar Lal Shahbaz in 7, and Imam Bargaz in Shikarpur, and Karachi saints, Shah Abdul Latif Bhitai, they have attempted, and they have attempted on Sachal Sarmas, because their teachings are the tolerant teachings. Their teachings are basically to create religious harmony among the societies which we have developed through centuries. Our nations are there, and the ideology of Talibanization and including the ideology of Pakistan is against the national ideology. That means we Sindhis should cease to call ourselves Sindhis. Punjabis cease to call them as they are Punjabis. And same way Balochs should cease to call them Balochis, Pashtuns cease to call them as Pashtuns. So they have got this identity phobia. History, we believe in our history, which is thousands of years. They have history phobia. They have cultural phobia, and they have language phobia. They are against our language. For example, in Sindh, they have completely banned Sindhi schools in hundreds and thousands of numbers, so that Sindhi language should not be propagated, and Sindhi language, which has a message of love, tolerance, and harmony, same as other national languages. I say national languages. Saraiki is a national language. Baloch is a national language. Pashtun is a national language. Sindhi is a national language. So these national languages are completely denied because there is a message of teachings of tolerance and religious harmony. So we have to fight and unite together to fight with this fundamentalist ideology and their strategic strength, which is getting now strength further by Talibanization of Afghanistan, which will have a huge impact on our regional nations, and we need to be prepared to fight and unite against these one, and strengthen our languages, our culture, our national identity, our history. We have to believe in our society. Thousands of years ago, we have defeated this fundamentalism, and we will defeat them through our cultural values. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hidayat Bhutto, sir. As Dr. Hidayat Bhutto sir was saying that it was during General Zia's regime that secular societies in Pakistan became the front of Zia's Islamization strategies. And one can imagine the impact of this strategy that just to talk about Balochistan, according to various sources, there are over 13,000 madrasas in Balochistan. And according to an American scholar, Christine Fair, as she said in 2014 and 15, that Balochistan recorded the highest ratio of enrollment to these madrasas in all over Pakistan. Now I'll request our final speaker, Hassan, Dost, to please share his opinion on the topic. Hassan, Dost, please.
Thank you, Baloch and BHRC for having me as a panelist on this important topic. As far as the current political and social change in Afghanistan is concerned, we need to look at the historical context of Baloch and Afghan nations. The Baloch and the Afghans have had a friendly relationship for centuries. Mir Nasir Khan Noori and Ahmad Shah Abdali's mutual trust and friendship show the historic connection of Baloch and the Afghan people. This relationship is still strong and continued. When Pakistan occupied Balochistan in 1971, Prince Abdul Karim Khan started a struggle against this occupation. Agha Karim went to Afghanistan with his comrades to organize the movement. Then in the 70s, the Baloch nation again fought for its right to sovereignty and independence from Pakistan. Nawab Kashmari went to France for exile, while a large number of Murri tribesmen under the leadership of General Sheriff Murri fell to Afghanistan. Later on, Nawab Murri joined them with thousands of Baloch people. He remained among his like-minded people, lead the struggle for Baloch freedom. After the fall of the Najib government, Baloch refugees and leaders were forced to leave Afghanistan. When Dr. Najib's government in Afghanistan came to an end, we have witnessed that the politics of Balochistan was indirectly affected. With the advent of the pro-Pakistan government in Afghanistan, it was impossible for the exiled Baloch leadership to stay there. Considering the situation, Nawab Kashmari came to Balochistan with his like-minded comrades. Apparently, the Taliban brought the change, but the reality was something else. The whole world knows that the proxy Mujahideen raised in Afghanistan by Pakistan had changed into the shape of the Taliban with the hand of the Cold War. They were getting instructions from Pakistan. This has been mentioned by various heads of Pakistan intelligence from time to time in the media. Given the historical background, it is easy for us to understand that whenever there is a political change in Afghanistan, the Baloch must have been affected. The main reason for this is that when any trouble or difficulty befalls the Afghans, they turn to Balochistan, and in the same way the Baloch. In difficult circumstances, take refuge in the Afghan land. When there is a political change on both sides, these two brotherly nations face its result. During the current Baloch struggle, thousands of refugees moved to Afghanistan. The Baloch national movement is concerned about their lives because the Baloch are refugees in these areas of Afghanistan where a ferocious battle going on at the moment between Taliban and Afghan army. We are concerned that the Taliban took over the control of those areas. The lives of these Baloch refugees will be in the danger. The Taliban are backed by the Pakistani ISI. ISI, through Taliban, will kill and force Baloch refugees once again to leave Afghanistan. On the other hand, if the Baloch refugees return to their homeland, there is a strong possibility that the Taliban will harm them along the way. If anyone succeeds in returning to their homeland, Pakistan will not delay in killing them. Therefore, we urge international organizations, especially UNHCR and United Nations, to make arrangements to save the lives of Baloch refugees in Afghanistan. Finally, the story of the Baloch movement tells us that the Baloch independence movement has been moving toward its destination continuously. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but there has been a spark. And this spark of freedom will continue until the liberation of the Baloch land. It is a fact that the current situation of Afghanistan will affect the Baloch and the Baloch movement, but will not end it. In the long term, Baloch will survive and come out of all hardships. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Hassan. As Mr. Hassan said, it is a known fact that the Taliban enjoy sanctuaries in Pakistan and are being used as a proxy parties who are in Afghanistan. But also these religious streams are being used to contain the Baloch nationalism. And as you rightly pointed, that the Baloch, some of the Baloch who actually had to flee Balochistan to the neighboring Afghanistan are now in immense danger, and the Pakistani military establishment can use the Taliban to target those Baloch refugees who are vulnerable in Afghanistan. Now I will request the Executive President of Baloch Human Rights Council, Dr. Dost, for his closing remarks, please.
Thank you, Governor. We are very grateful to Honorable Afrasiab Khattak and Ayesha, especially to find time and to enlighten us about this burning topic that is very important, not only for the Baloch, but also for Sindhis, Raikis, and Pashtuns. I was thinking of speaking on some of the aspects of this problem, of the situation, but speaking after Afrasiab Khattak and Ayesha is very difficult, and they have deliberated in detail on actually all aspects of the situation. I just only say a few words about 2 or 3 things. The first is when the situation developed, and probably as it is being claimed by Pakistani sources and also seconded by Western analysts, that within a few months, at least southern Afghanistan will be in the total control of Pakistani army through Taliban. So when this situation arises, this will give a boost to the fundamentalist forces or fanatical forces in Pakistan, not only in Afghanistan, but Pakistan, and also it will affect Iran. there are, with the conservative estimate, I think maybe Ayesha will know better, but they say that nearly 100,000 students or Talib are graduating from the religious schools or madrasas in various parts of Pakistan, which are run directly or indirectly by the Pakistani army. So this is a huge number. If you compare the number of law enforcement agencies, then the number of Talibans will surpass. Another aspect is that Pakistan is in deep financial crisis. Pakistan's godfather, United States and the Western countries, they are not pouring dollars and pounds into the coffers of Pakistan or Pakistani army. So, with the historical traditions of Afghan people, it is certain that the Afghans will not surrender to the Pakistani army. They will resist, they will fight, and the fight will go on. It means that Pakistani finances will collapse, because if you invade a country, if you fight a protracted war, it will cost money besides other things. So Pakistan is already a basket case. So from where Pakistan will get this money? There's only one way to get this money, to finance the Afghan war, and that is the drug money. Pakistan's army is already deeply involved in international drug trafficking. And one of the impacts of the Afghan conflict with Pakistan will be the increased level of drug trafficking. And this will directly and indirectly affect our societies. The Pashtun, the Baloch, Sindhi, Saraiki, their society has already been destroyed or disturbed to a large extent by the manipulation of Pakistani army. Every social outcast in these areas are promoted as the leader of the societies. Every drug peddler, they have been brought to the assemblies, to the provincial assemblies, to the Senate of Pakistan, to the National Assembly of Pakistan. In a way, the society which we saw in 1970s and 60s, it is no more there. The rules of business in our society are changed. This conflict, which Pakistan is going to be involved in some years, will increase this process. Pakistani army will suppress the genuine and decent leadership in suppressed nations, and brought up another breed of social outcast as the political leader, as intellectual, as writers, and this will change the shape of our societies within 5-10 years in a very unrecognizable state that is very dangerous to our national identity, to our historical, social, cultural traditions. And then there is another aspect which is the intended consequence of this conflict on Punjab or Pakistan. Imagine a situation after 2, 3, 4, 5 years when Pakistan will be in a dominant position in Afghanistan through Taliban. The Taliban with Pakistan army is sending in Afghanistan today at the rate of 500,000 per person, per family. They will not be needed anymore in Afghanistan. They will return with Kalashnikov, with guns, and grenades, with rocket launchers, back into Pakistan. What will happen when hundreds and thousands of Taliban, fully armed, will come back with a sense of frustration, with a sense of betrayal? What will happen to Punjab? What will happen to Pakistani army? That is an unintended consequence of this conflict. But anyhow, things are going not the right way. These are the bad times for our people. And we can only hope that the political leadership there, although they are very weak, they are suppressed, they are subjugated, but still they have the resolve to confront the situation. And I again thank Afrasiab Khattak and BHRC, Dr. Hidayat, and Hassan, Dost, and all the participants who have come. Many of them have come from a long way to attend this session, and this is very encouraging for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nasir, for summing up the discussion. We will have a short Q&A session before we conclude this session. And if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. Okay. And okay. Do you want to?
Yes, I will ask. I would want to ask Afrasiab Khattak and maybe Aisha one question. Afrasiab Khattak has been an inspiration for us in the Baloch Students Organization in the good old days of National Awami Party and Pashto Federation. And we still look for people like him for inspiration. And I would like to ask Afrasiab Khattak, what are the chances of a united front of all liberal, secular, progressive, and nationalist forces in Pakistan to counter this aggression, the new aggression of Pakistani state and Pakistani army?
Thank you very much, Dr. Saib, for your kind words, very generous words. Yes, I also have warm memories of our joint struggle, particularly in prison, in Hyderabad, in March prison, and also during my exile in 1980s, where I lived in Kabul together with Nawab Saib Ashmari, Razi Bukti, Habib Jalib, and other comrades and friends. Thank you. Yeah, this is a very important question. I think there is going to be realignment of forces in Pakistan, in the region, and international. As we understand, the injection of Taliban in Afghanistan is aimed at blocking China's Belt and Road Initiative, and also to destabilize Central Asia for Russia, so that Russia could not dominate Europe. So this is briefly. So inside the country, unfortunately, the old political parties have unfortunately have taken very opportunistic position. They have sort of become part of this so-called system. It's an unannounced martial law, basically. The sweeping coup, which started in 2014, has now sort of made Pakistani state almost dysfunctional. Judiciary and parliament have been made dysfunctional. And the political parties, unfortunately, have opportunistically looked towards army to get selected, like Imran Khan is selected in 2018. They are in queue for this election. There are some elements in every party who are against this narrative, against this line, this strategy, but they are pockets. And one good thing is that even in Punjab, one can see among youth a certain level of awareness. But I think we have to mobilize youth particularly. I believe youth is a very dynamic force in Pakistan, and with social media, with urbanization, it has the potential of leading the movement in Pakistan. We have to include women. We have to, but it should be led by youth. I am working with youth, Pashtun youth. I was a few months back, I was in Quetta. I'm trying to meet youth from other provinces, nationalities, in Karachi, in Lahore. So I think the youth has to lead. But I agree with the idea of the greater environment, because this fascist onslaught of this fundamentalism is something which has to be stopped. Otherwise, it really, ultimately, it will be the undoing of Pakistan as state. Also, I'm confident that there is no happy ending of this path of fundamentalism extremism. But you see, I'm afraid that even Western countries don't mind a huge destabilization here. The emergence of Sunni extremist states around China and Russia, they wouldn't mind. And that's probably the Taliban onslaught aimed at. But you see, in Pakistan, we will lose even this so-called democracy in the so-called constitution, because for all practical purposes, the constitution is not being implemented, and the army is calling the shots. It's an unannounced martial law, and to push it back, we need a democratic alliance of secular and democratic forces. So I think through youth initiative, we will try to have such an alliance. Thank you very much.
Very quickly add to what Afrasiab has already said, with one word of caution, which is, I think the extremism onslaught is something that we are unable to fight. There is no alternative narrative. I mean, different elements in the society, different, and in all our parts. What is missing is something which is deeply rooted in our culture. And what we need to do is redefine our culture as, you know, in its real sense, in its secular sense, in its, you know, in its liberal values. And that, unfortunately, is a game that we may be losing. We may have lost. There is nothing there. There is no political party today in Pakistan which is strong enough to stand up. And let's face it, the fact is that every political party which has wanted to come into power has compromised on liberal values, on secular values. So from Pakistan's People's Party to PMLN and PTI, and even ANP to that extent now, the modern ANP. None of these parties are speaking a modern, secular, rational language. They compromise at many levels. And so I'm afraid that with greater influence of, presence of Taliban, uh, and the two things which are going to happen. One is that, what the military had managed to do with counterterrorism was at least reduce number of violence, at least present an image that, the war had been won. Unfortunately now, and managed to, for the sake of financial, showing a different face to the Financial Action Task Force, they had quietened down extremist organizations. But now, I'm afraid, these extremist organizations will again like to re-emerge, increase their influence in the society. Uh, now they can say that, if Taliban can actually be there in Afghanistan, why can't we have a similar rule in Pakistan? So that's a major problem that I see happening. But ultimately, we are, our problem is that we're not going to be like, we were not going to be a theocracy like Iran because they're different sects. We're divided and that's where the confusion lies. But we're already a hybrid theocracy. Let's not confuse ourselves. Pakistan is not just a hybrid military civil rule, it's also a hybrid theocracy. And there is no game other or a new plan in town in anyone's head how to change it around. And I think there is no intention either.
Yes, please introduce yourself.
My name is Baloch. I belong to Baloch Liberation Party, UK. So my question is with Dr. Aisha, Siddika, and I think Afrasiab, if he's online. So both of you, as you discuss about the extremism, but there are, compared to extremism in Pakistan, especially in the region, to Taliban, the Baloch movement, how you see the West and like the United Kingdom, the European Union, the USA, why don't they prefer Baloch movement, which is independent and of course a liberal, secular, and as they say they support all the seculars, not Talibanization and extremists, but it seems they are supporting since 1990, 1890 on, and Doha meetings were proof that all Talibans are engaged with these Western countries in Doha. And that was the plan. Today, the implementation is started in Afghanistan to how they enter without an army. Taliban is capturing different districts in Afghanistan without any support of Pakistan, United States, or other Western countries. It seems they are all supporting them. Even they are being trained by Pakistan, which is open truth. So my question is why these Western countries and in the region also, Iran, India, why don't they support the Baloch movement in Balochistan? We are secular, we are a blessed nation, like Sindh also there are Sindhi movements, they are secular. In Pashtun, very secular movements are there, but they are not being supported. Why? What are the reasons? Can you just tell me?
You see, very quickly before Afrasiab, Khattak says something, I think it's important to understand that part of the problem that Baloch movement is not noticed is it's not emerged as a serious threat for anyone. It's not noticeable. the movement itself. And that's where the issue is. I mean, the fact of the matter for Baloch insurgency, the insurgency part is noticed by the Pakistani state, but it's kind of used more, to kind of justify the state's expanding role. But it's not, it's not an insurgency which bleeds the state that much, and therefore it's not noticeable. See, as far as these other countries are concerned, they're not noticed, these movements are not noticed because generally Pakistan is not noticed. See, Pakistan for the United States the longest, Pakistan's only significance for United States was in reference to the former Soviet Union and then Afghanistan. So generally you can argue that it was primarily in reference to Afghanistan. What do you do in Afghanistan? Firstly, there was the Soviet Union, and then it was the Taliban, and therefore secularism or any such movements. I think what is important to understand is that I don't think that anything will come out of expecting from these countries that they will help. They will not. It's important to raise a political movement within, number one, and also for these movements to become noticeable by linking up with other movements in the country. Otherwise, I don't think that either the West would want to take the Baloch movement seriously. And the other factor is that in these Western worlds, the fact of the matter is that the leaders of either, the Baloch movement that are in exile, and even in the US. So there is that kind of a dependency. They don't get noticed here. I think movements here need to understand, movements like the Baloch movement or any other movement need to understand that they've not even understood how the parliamentary system, how the human rights system functions. So that voice doesn't reach the power circles here. So if it doesn't reach the power circles, how would you get noticed?
Afrasiab, did you hear the question, or you want me to repeat it?
No, not clearly. I missed it. Can you please briefly tell me?
Yes, please. The gentleman was asking that why is the West not paying attention or not supporting the secular and liberal movements in Pakistan, like those of Baloch and Sindhis and Pashtuns, instead of focusing and supporting the religious extremists? Please.
I think it's quite clear that India was partitioned because the Western powers, led by British at that time, they wanted to have a detonator to explode the Muslim masses living around the Soviet Union, starting from Xinjiang, 5 republics of Central Asia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Turkey, West Asia, and then North Africa, Algeria, Tunis, Libya. So you see, this was a big mess, and they wanted to have a detonator. And you see, Pakistan, and it worked very well for them. In the 1980s, when they were fighting communism, I mean, they mobilized the jihad, they revived jihad, and you see, even now it's very effective. We thought, some of us thought, and we were mistaken, we thought the West will stop using religious card after 9/11. We thought it was hitting the West. We thought they would realize that the extremist part has got in the system of this society, but we were wrong. I think they have turned back to religious extremism because they have great experience in using it in the Middle East and West Asia and South Asia, and they're going to use it against China and Russia. And it works for them. You see, otherwise, Central Asia remains to be Russia's soft belly. and the only thing that can penetrate is religious card. Even Xinjiang, they would like to use it in Xinjiang. So there are 36,000 religious seminarists in Pakistan, 36,000. You see, all of them are not even registered, let alone reformed. They're not even registered. You see, and the problem is that in Pakistan, extremism has penetrated the state. It's not just in the society. You see, if had it only been in society, so democratic forces in the state would have come together to defeat it. But you see, it is in the state system. So the factories, you see, Pakistan was talking a lot about fighting against terrorism and de-radicalization. We saw national action plan in 2014. But because the state was not willing to implement any counter-terrorism or counter-extremism program, these were just public relation exercises that the military was doing. So I think we have a very long fight, and I don't think we can rely on the West. We have to rely on ourselves. We have to unite, and I agree with Aisha that we have to work together. We have to make alliances.
Thank you very much, Afrasiab, Khattak. Once again, I'm really very thankful to all of our distinguished speakers, Mr. Dr. Siddiqa, and all the participants for taking time and participating in today's conference. I really appreciate it. Now we will conclude this session and we will have lunch. The lunch is ready, please serve yourself. And after the lunch, about say 30 minutes, we will have another session which will be the book launch of Hassan School. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.